Welcome back. We are at stream number 27 on this series of programming an NES game live on stream on Twitch. Last episode we were working on getting the status bar working with loading tiles, and if you recall, the problem we ran into is this, where the status bar here is flickering, and it seems to correspond to every time we load a load a row of tiles into the name table. So you can see as we're loading those, if we slow down the emulation, seems to correspond to that particular event. So it's much easier to see it as it's happening slowly. So once we get to a point where we load another row, you can see it goes away as soon as the row gets updated. So I want to try and solve that problem tonight, and then if I get that working, we will wrap it for now, and then we can resume Monday fresh. I'm a little travel worn from I was doing some traveling for work this week, so I'm a little tired. But anyway, let's get that let's get rolling with this. So the only reason that we found that the status bar was going away was I noticed that once we got to the point where we were actually loading the tiles into the name table, that's when we had the problem where we actually saw the status bar go away. So I'll recap this just to sort of demonstrate that. But once we got past, let's see, where was that? So we were writing these, and I had unrolled the loop and only done the first 4 tiles of the meta tile. So if I undo these operations where we're storing into 2006 and 2007, obviously we will not be updating the tiles in here anymore, but that basically did I not? Oh, I didn't assemble it. By turning that, wait a minute, why is this behaving differently now than last time? Am I still doing an update? I am doing this, but that shouldn't matter. Last time I thought by turning off the operations that were updating, is it really, is it going to be one of those streams? There we go. So was it just not rereading the file? Okay, so even doing the bit on 2002 seems to be causing a problem. So what I'm wondering is if we're having an issue because if you recall from last time, we were looking at the documentation and it was saying that writes to 2006 and 2007 caused the counter to get modified. I'm wondering if what we need to do is change the logic that handles resetting the interrupt to, I'm pretty sure we had done this last stream, but I just want to confirm. I want to move these operations to the bottom once we're done incrementing the adding the new row, but before, you know what, let's do it after the scroll also. So at this point, we're resetting our interrupt counter to fire off. We're acknowledging it, and then we're resetting it. Now, one thing I was thinking about is, do we really need to be doing this every time the reset? We're resetting that counter. And I guess we do in order to be able to make sure that we're properly getting the same count every time. I'm not 100% sure. We'll have to see what the ramifications of that are. So moving that, interesting. So moving that down to the bottom seems to be causing the same behavior as we were seeing before. But obviously we're not updating the name table. So is it purely just a timing thing? And again, do we need to be doing this every time? Or should we be setting up the counter once and then just acknowledging it and re-enabling it every time in the the NMI? And we had even tried turning the NMI off to ensure that it didn't occur during the time that the interrupt was occurring for the for MMC3's interrupt, and that didn't have any impact on it. So what I want to try and do, I want to change this here. I want to move that up to I guess no. Okay, so now thinking about this, once the counter hits 0, that's when the interrupt is going to occur, right? And so we do have to keep resetting it. Just bring up a browser window here and go back to that documentation. Actually, I want the mapper documentation. I realize that the last few streams have been pretty heavy in terms of me looking this stuff up live, but you know, sometimes that's what it is, right? And for normal work stuff that I do, a lot of times, you know, it's not a unique problem. You're finding somebody else having the same problem on something like Stack Overflow, just because for most business applications, people are using the same frameworks. But for something like this, obviously pretty limited number of people doing this, and I'm not going to post live to the forums on NESDev or Nintendo Age because, well, we wouldn't get an answer in any amount of time that makes sense. So, plus it's more interesting to kind of puzzle through this and try and figure it out. All right, so let's so the E0 disables the interrupts and acknowledges any pending interrupts. So we're doing that. The interrupt occurs, let's see, when the RQ is clocked, the counter value is checked if 0 or the reload flag is true. It's reloaded with the IRQ latched value C1000, otherwise it decrements. If the IRQ counter is 0 and IRQs are enabled and IRQ is triggered, the alternate revision checks the IRQ counter transition from 1 to 0, whether from decrementing or reloading. So all this means is basically we do have to keep resetting this because we want to set the counter value to C0. So as it notes, this is not going to change the counter. It doesn't change the counter until it... Oh, so let's see, so when it hits 0, it's reloaded with that value. So maybe we don't need to be doing this every time like I thought. I wonder if that would make sense, because once we set that value, what does it do once it hits 0? Does it, I guess it reloads it from the value that was previously written to C1000. Let's try that. Let's see. Let's change this to say acknowledge, and then okay, so we've got that there. I want to go back to once we actually transition. So we want to set up the counter once we've transitioned from the title screen to a new game. So that would be this, right? So set up IRQ counter and reload. So let's see if doing it this way has any sort of effect. Well, it certainly has an effect. And that's kind of what I expected. So what I think is happening in this situation, other than it flashing like crazy, what I'm pretty sure is happening in this situation is that because the timing isn't fully exact between the IRQ counter and the display, right, that we know there are things that will affect. Let me pause this because it's driving me crazy to see that. We know that there are things that are going to clock the counter based on the documentation. And so although maybe the first frame will draw with the status bar displayed properly on the bottom, you have to figure that all the other operations we're doing are offsetting that counter incorrectly. And so it's going to, over time, drift, and which is why I think it's kind of randomly flickering the whole screen. And so by not resetting it every time, we're essentially leaving to the randomness of the system where the status bar gets redrawn. So that's kind of what I thought was going to happen if we didn't reload it every time, but I wanted to confirm that. So unpause the emulator. Alright, so now we're back to just having the flicker down here. I mean, I guess... I mean, does that mean we need to... Well, whoa, now that's interesting. What... Why is that different? I'm hitting start to go to the pause state, and then it works fine. Is it because in the pause, where is the pause state handled? I guess when it's pausing the game. Pause state. Yeah, the game state is set to pause, and then in the VBlank loop, or not the VBlank loop, in the VBlank code here, if it's not doing the process play state, then it's immediately going to, it looks like it's going to process scrolling. Interesting. All right, well, I mean, that further kind of confirms that something with the way that we're manipulating the PPU is causing this. Now, what's strange is it's flickering again, and I thought we had yeah, so we're back to the point where I've commented out and gotten us back to kind of the original state where we're not doing the updates. Interesting. Is it just not rebuilding properly? I don't know. So, all right. So, do I need to reset the counter if we load a row to force the IRQ to occur properly synchronized again? Like, do I need to do, let's see, load this, take all of this stuff and basically say, okay, if we're loading the row here after we've loaded it, let's see, process screen memory. That's just determining which row we want to go to until we're done. So basically I want to, in here, I'm going to try resetting the interrupt counter and see if that causes the flicker to go away. Let's see, first of all, if this has any sort of negative effect on the code as is. So we're seeing, you know, an artifact here just because of the timing not being exact, but that's okay. So now if I bring back the code that's loading the tiles, will we see the same problem, or will it be fixed now? See, I would have thought, I mean, is it just because of the difference in timing? It's so strange that this is still not behaving. I mean, we're not talking about a huge time difference here, I don't think, in the NMI. I mean, yeah, so it's, we're adding a couple hundred cycles, but that's more, that shouldn't, I mean, that's, we have more than enough cycles still to be able to handle the full NMI. But it's almost as if it's the extra couple hundred cycles is causing, I wonder if there's anything that'll help us debug the IRQ and seeing if the IRQ gets fired or not. That's the memory breakpoint. I don't care about that right now. Huh. I wonder if Nintaco has any sort of different facilities for breaking in the debugger on IRQ. So let's load this up. Make sure it's behaving the same way. Yeah, okay, so it's behaving the same way. So somewhere along the lines, along the way, we broke the pause code somehow. But that makes, well, see, now that's really bizarre because it's still loading. It's still loading. It's still loading tiles, but now the flicker is gone. So what's different about that? If the game state is paused, let me make sure that that's, first of all, actually changing the game state. So game state should be the first byte. So we're not getting that, and the game state is 4, and then it goes back to 3, and it starts flickering. Alright, so what is the difference between when the game state is, the game is playing and it's paused? Because obviously something got broken there where the game being paused is still causing scrolling to occur. Can I not move the ship anymore? Okay, so I can't move the ship anymore or spawn entities, but the background is still occurring. So, so let's see. Branch if not equal to process gameplay state. Otherwise, prepare PPU for palette change. Store the color. Swap. Oh, that's okay. So that's if it's title screen. Otherwise, otherwise it is going to process gameplay state. So it's doing all of this stuff the same way. This is all exactly the same. So is it something in the game loop that's causing this? That's weird. Let me go back to FCEUX to see the profiling for a second here. I wouldn't have expected it to be the game loop, but so the game loop is no longer processing, and then the problem goes away. Huh. Very, very interesting. All right, so let's go to the game loop code here. So we have local gameplay state, and that goes to gameplay state. And so what is it doing? It's setting up the sprite memory. It's checking the controller. It's processing entities. It's drawing the entities. So let's do this. I'm curious to see if it's a timing related thing or if it's actually something to do with the logic. So if I restart this and I don't draw the entities, okay, it doesn't seem to matter if we're drawing the entities, and the game loop code is definitely a little bit less intensive because we've got 3,400 or 3,500 cycles. If we put the drawback, it becomes 4,300. So we're or 44. We're gaining some cycles back, and I would expect that if it was something related to the timing, that it's likely we would see that problem change. We would see that behavior change, and it's not. Right? I mean, it looks basically, to my eye, it looks exactly the same. And then if we pause, it's still working then with the display bar, the display status bar correctly. So is it something else we're doing in here that we're manipulating the PPU that's causing the problem? Or, well, if it's paused, let's see. So if the game is paused, it goes to pause state, and then what does it do? I think it just jumps to, checks for the start, and then it goes wait for draw to complete. So it is still waiting for the NMI to finish, but it is not doing all of this other stuff. So does it have something to do with sprite mem? Are we somehow, because I know we started using sprite mem for You know, maybe that's what it is. Maybe, I mean, that would make sense. Maybe it's because we are changing the value of sprite mem, which needs to be used by the game loop, but then the game loop, I would have thought that we would have seen problems in the game loop. Let's eliminate that. Let's make sure that that isn't the problem. So let's call this row mem. Okay, and then we know for load level it's okay because that's happening before we do any processing of the game loop in the actual playing the game state. So let's, okay, so let's call this row mem. And then we use screen mem there. So that was the only place we were using it, I think. Yeah. So let's see if that's all it was. I mean, it's entirely possible that because of the way the interrupts and the NMI are jumping around, we're having a problem because we're corrupting that sprite mem. So let's see. Yep, that's what it was. Okay. Well, it's a little annoying that that's what it was, but at least it's working now. So that's pretty cool. Cool. All right, so now obviously the other problem, well, we'll get to that in a second. So that was the issue. Wonder if we can, I wonder if we could fix the position of this little glitch. I wonder if that's just because of the timing. Like, I imagine that what it is by the time we recycle the counter, I don't know, it could just be some of the operations that are occurring are causing that to trigger. Oh, and we have this here. We don't need to do this anymore. This was just an experiment to see if that fixed the problem, but obviously it had nothing to do with that. Now that's interesting. So let me do this. I want to take a screenshot of. Did I take a screenshot? I did. I'm gonna take a screenshot of the glitch here, and then I had changed this. I noticed that the position is a little bit different. So let's rebuild this, and then let's see if. Just a quick visual comparison if that's any different from yeah, it is. Looks like it's further over. Well, it's hard to tell. What are the XY coordinates? Show XY coordinates. No. So that's 355 by 791. That was just me. Oh, come on, Paint. Seriously? I just don't want the. Damn it. So it was 355 by 791. This is. So it is a little bit over to the left more. I mean, that's not critically important for what we're doing right now. Be nice to be able to get that so that the glitch is kind of out of the way, but the more important thing is that the status bar is working now without that crazy flicker. So now, alright, so now we have to address the other issue, which is we're only loading a single row of the meta tile at a time, and realistically we should be loading the entire row of meta tiles for all of those all at once. So let's go back to that code and look at that. Alright, so what I'd done was I'd manually unrolled this so that we were getting the first four. What I think we probably want to do, let me think about that. The first thing is, how do we gotta find, we found the beginning. We found the first meta tile by looking in row mem y, and then we did this multiply, right? And then we offset by the inner row. So let me add some comments here, because this is a little bit gnarly. So load the meta tile value from the map data, and then multiply by 16 to offset for the number of tiles per meta tile, right? Then we started that in temp, because then we need to increment, grab the internal row for the meta tile and multiply that by 4. Meta tiles are 4 by 4, and add that to our offset to get the row we need. So what it's looking like is, this is the point here where we have the row of meta tiles that we need, and then once we have that, we need to iterate through each meta tile. So if I draw that, we have our map, and we have our row of meta tiles, however many it is, and then within that we have our row of individual 8-pixel tiles. And what we need to do is we need to first iterate through, we need to iterate over these meta tiles and also over these individual tiles within the meta tiles. So that's what we're doing here partially. We're not doing the iteration over all of the meta tiles, but then this part is fine. So what I feel like we need to do is we need to put this into a loop where we increment y. Let me think about that. Yeah, we would increment y because y is the offset into the memory, right? So that y is now at this point pointing to here, and we just need to increment that because it's a linear array of memory, which is simple enough. And then let's see, and then depending on the value we get back out of y, we need to do this multiply by 16, and then we add the offset of m tile y. We can actually, we don't have to do this every time. We can actually store this Yeah, so we can store this because we don't need to. mtile y is not changing here out inside this loop. So let's see. So we can load a mtile y. We multiply by 4. And then we can store a into temp2. Which I think we still have. We may have gotten rid of it, but we'll know shortly. Once we do that, we now get the tile, we multiply it by 16 rather. We don't need to, oh, maybe we don't need temp. We can do it this way, yeah. So we don't need to do that. We store that into temp. We load we multiply by 16. We clear the carry and add temp, which is now this offset, which is good. That's what we want. So even without doing anything, this change should be the same. We've just rearranged it a little bit. And that looks to be the same. I mean, it's hard to tell without it properly loading the data, but that's okay. So now what we need to do is we need to increment y until y, let's see, y would be, if they're, y would increment until it's 8. Because, again, the screen is composed of a row of meta tiles, and there are 32 regular tiles that fit in here, and a meta tile is 4 by 4, so 32 divided by 4 is 8, right? So we've got our load y0, call this next meta tile. Actually, we want to do that afterwards. So we're going to load that. We're going to do the multiply by 16 and add the value of mtile y to it. And then we're going to do our 4 writes. We don't need this additional increment to x. We don't need to do the screen memory stuff yet because we're still working on that row. And then we're going to increment y, and then we're going to compare. I always forget these. One of these days I'm just going to print out this reference in a small enough form where it doesn't look stupid for me to read it on stream. Compare y to 8. Branch if not equal to next meta tile. So let's see. So yeah, so once we hit 8, we're done. And then we're going to change the value of screen mem, because screen mem needs to contain the next row in the name table that we want to load up. And then we're done. That, I think, will load an entire row. We'll find out soon enough. Let's slow this down so we can actually see what's going on. Reassemble that. Restart. Where's the name table viewer? Is that open? It is? Okay, so let's see if this got botched or not. Alright, so this got botched. What did I... Let's see. Going to walk through this first before I start stepping through the debugger. So x is 0. Oh, you know, that actually would help. We need to reset x every time we go through here. Load x0 because we're using it. We can do it closer to the place we're actually using it. So we need to do that in order to And then also, we actually don't need to do this every time, because once we load the position, every write to 2007 will populate the next tile that we need. So we just need to initialize that one time. Set the screen memory position for the right location in the name table, and then we will and then after that we'll be populating the entire row across. Alright, so that is looking better. So let's see if it looks better in the actual running code. Alright, so at least now it's clearing out the entire row, even if it's not getting the right data. So that's something. That's what it was supposed to do in the first place. I imagine that there's just something wrong with the way that we're grabbing the meta tiles. So let's debug that. I'm sure that's everybody's favorite thing to watch, is to see me step through the assembly. I mean, it's interesting to watch, I think, live, because you get to see kind of how every instruction affects what's going on in the game. But I know it can be tedious at times, but it's the only way I've found for these kinds of issues to really understand what's going on. So that's 7FC that we're writing to, right? 7FC. We're gonna write breakpoint. Okay. So let me just reset the game. Run it. And run it again. And hit start. And then once we hit the breakpoint, it's because we are in the process of loading a new row. So, alright, so we've stored screen memory positions in 2006. That's good, because that's going to indicate where we want to grab. That's where we want to put the tile information. So that's all good. So the next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be grabbing the meta tile data. And the value is 2, it says. So now we're going to offset that by multiplying by 16. You know, the only thing I'm wondering about is if temp is being used somewhere else that's causing this problem. We may just need to use a different location to temporarily store that. We could potentially even just use the stack. Let's see, because I know I'm trying to, minimize the number of places, the number of variables that we are using, but this is all in load tiles, so that's all okay. Let's unload background. Yeah. This is the title screen. This is in load new row. Well, let's see. Let's if we go to the debugger and look at the memory. What is the position that it's saying in the debugger is temp 2? 11. So it's saying 4. I mean, if we run it again, oh well, so that's weird. So this keeps loading 0. let's take a look at this. So meta tiles X. Wait a minute. Did I... Was X supposed to... Oh, okay. That's why. So X shouldn't be 0. X should be the position into meta tiles that we're interested in grabbing. So this doesn't need to be reinitialized there like I thought it did. Let's see if that fixes it. Let me just disable this breakpoint here. Run. So, I mean, I have this running in super slow mode here. Okay, this looks more promising because we're actually seeing updates that look like it's loading the rows from the map properly. You can see the NMI is jumping up about double what it was. And that's because it's loading the entire row as it goes. So if we go back to, well, that it looks like now we're going into garbage, but that looks pretty close. It looks like the tile offset might be wrong for those gradient tiles. Oh, and the pause is still not actually pausing. Let's see. Why would that be? Is it off by 1? I mean, if we go back to the name table, let me reset this here, and we'll pause it after it loads some tiles. All right, so what I wanted it to do was for those meta tiles, I wanted it to load starting with 69 at the top of that meta tile, right? So that's 70. That's 75. That is 69 there. Oh. So it's actually, that's interesting. So I wasn't anticipating that, but that, so what it's doing, it's actually correct. It's correct, but it's wrong. And it's wrong because it's loading the meta tile flipped, right? So when it's looking at the map, the first tile it's looking for is this, or that's the first meta tile, and then it's going into the meta tile and looking for the first row, and then this is the second row, and this is the third row, and that's the fourth row, and that's fine, except that in memory the meta tile is actually in the other direction, and that's why the gradient isn't smooth. If we reverse that, then the gradient would be smooth. But now that kind of begs the question of, was this such a good idea to do it this way? I mean, it's a simple problem to solve in that we could just, you know, you flip the asset in Photoshop or whatever so that it renders it properly, because what we're doing is we're loading this whole screen, and then these are the additional meta tiles that we're then scrolling through until we get to the end. but because this is appending to the top as opposed to the bottom, again, the order of the tiles is wrong. I mean, there are a couple of ways we could fix it. We could probably just pretty easily fix it in the code and change the M tile Y counter to decrement instead of incrementing like we're doing right now. So let's do that. So let's do this. We're going to decrement M tile Y. We're going to load it. We're going to see if it's FF because we've gone past 0. And then when we reload it, we want to load it with 4 because we're going to decrement it again. Is that right? Yes, that's right. And then I believe we were at the end of loading the level. Yeah, we were resetting that to 0. We want to make that 4. Could it be as simple as that? We're just reversing the way it's loading the tiles? Possibly. I don't know. Okay, so that was better. It looks like I maybe did something stupid with the and just have an off by 1 error. Let's see. Yep, that's all it was. It was just off by 1. All right, and now we're loading those in the appropriate order. So everything looks good up until the time that we get to the end of the level, at which point we start going into the ROM memory and getting garbage. What I also don't like is I don't like that you can see, I mean, it's okay for what we were doing. I don't like that we're seeing the update at the top of the screen like that. It's strange that I wonder if it's so depending on how long it takes for it to access the tiles, I guess it's potentially means we're scrolling faster than we're loading. Is that possible? I guess so. Looks like we've looped back to the actual level data. So, or maybe there's a bug. That's also possible. There's a bug where we're not properly changing the addresses each time we cycle through, and so we get off by a little bit every time. Let me see. Where's the bottom? The bottom is like right here. 240. So that's the bottom of the screen. So just to be clear, is it every time we hit the bottom we lose? It does seem to correlate with every time we finish looping, we're getting shifted and seeing more and more of the updates, because the first time through it looks fine. Actually it looks great. It looks exactly the way I wanted it to, where you don't see the updates, but every time. All right, so let's see, is that just a problem of what would cause that? Is it the update to the screen mem being wrong? So subtracting a row And then it's storing it and it's comparing it to E0, which would have meant we would have looped back over. So if it's equal to E0, then we're going to decrement screen mem by 1. We're going to load that into memory. Well, actually, this is wrong, right? Because it should just stay, right? Because we're not loading across 2 screens. Let me think about that for a second. Or is that right? Oh no, that's right, because this has to decrement down from 23, or wait, is it 23? 28? I don't remember. It's 23A0. Why is, let's see, that's 23A0 is this. Oh, is it the overscan? Should it be? No, it would just be this. But the scrolling is going past that. But you wouldn't see it. So I'm wondering if this has to do with so the status bar is updating at the scanline. Where is it updating that? Well, wait a minute. Why? That's weird. Why is it showing it? Why is it drifting? Or is it just... I'm a little confused here because that shouldn't be different, should it? Display on scanline 0. Sorry, I'm just trying to puzzle out what would be causing this behavior. Weird, the name table refresh is not, doesn't seem to be, something about it's not drawing it consistently. I want to try it on here, see if the name table viewer is a little bit more clear with what it's doing on the updates. Right. So I think what's happening is that I am updating tiles all the way down to 23A0, but I don't think the scroll is actually, I wonder if the scroll is actually getting that far down. Because of the way that the screen works with the scroll position. Let's slow that down and power cycle and try this again and look at the Oh, damn it! I wanted it to be the same speed as before. So it's interesting. So that's the scroll position, and every time we hit a line, we're updating the row. Now the question is, when we hop back down there, okay. So we've already fallen behind a row of regular pixels. And I think it's, like I said, I think it's because the scroll position is jumping down a little bit higher than what we're actually updating in the name table. Because the name table is updating starting at 23A0. The scroll line does not appear to be going that far down. It appears to be just about... Let's see, where is it jumping down to? Well, it actually seems like it... Interesting. It's just too slow that way. It is jumping all the way down to 23A0. Is that the problem? Is it that we are updating? So we're at 2 rows difference, it looks like. Does it stay consistent at 2 rows? Or are we at 3 now? Looks like we're at 3 now. So it's ever so slightly drifting apart. Can I make this bigger? Looks like now we're at 4. So now we're a whole meta tile off. So is it drifting a half tile every cycle? The only reason I care is it might give us a clue as to what's actually happening. Now it's off by 1. Just so no. Okay. So when we scroll, we're incrementing. We're setting scroll X and scroll Y. Where is it processing that? Oh. That could be why. So originally, we were doing things by 2 with the scrolling. What is the maximum scroll location? I don't think it's EE. I think it's F0. And I had changed it to EE because we were doing by 2. Let's see, scroll. Horizontal offset range from 0 to 255. Normal vertical is 0 to 239, while values 240, 255 are treated as -16 through -1 in a way, but the tile data is incorrectly fetched from the attribute table. So should we just be doing 239 and hex is EF? Should just be doing EF here. Let's see. Where are the windows? So let's see how this goes. That's looking closer. We've gone through several cycles without it missing and showing, and then we're not, and then it's showing the tiles being redrawn on the top. So that may have fixed it. I just wanted to run through. I'm just going to run it through at high speed to see if eventually it does drift or not. I'm pretty sure that fixed it, though. And again, that was an artifact of the fact that originally the scrolling was happening at a speed of 2 at a time versus 1. And so the checking and the offsetting that it was doing for the scrolling was based on that, which is why every time it would hit the top. Oh, we're still drifting a little bit. It just took a lot longer to get there. And so it's not as bad. I wonder... I mean, we really want to do it. 0 is okay, but EF, but FF wouldn't be, because then we're into what it was saying is the negative part of the screen. So let's see if this will fix it. And again, we'll run it at high speed just to kind of see if... Now, obviously, at some point, we need to make this work at a higher speed, but I want to make this work in a way that's stable first before we worry about, you know, scrolling at a faster rate. The fact that we're loading the tiles now is good, and I just want to make sure that the update is always going to be slightly behind the tile drawing so that we don't see that occur while you're playing. So right now we're telling it to run at max speed, whatever that actually is. And it's gone through a bunch of cycles. It looks like it's okay. I mean, it's possible it's still happening, but it would be ever so slight, and it would have to be a pretty long level. I mean, I think I'm pretty satisfied with this, given the number of loops we'd have to do to make this occur. So, okay. Well, that's good. So we got that all sorted out. The status bar is now drawing properly. We are able to load data correctly from that level, albeit it's a pretty short level, but it's, you know, the fact that we've got that all working now correctly with the scrolling is good. So at this point, what I'd say we need to do is a couple of things. We're not going to do it tonight. I think I'm going to wrap it tonight with this, because we've actually managed to do what I wanted to. But what I would say is we'll probably, just looking to see if this actually starts getting garbled data at a point where we have a gradient tile displayed. Yeah. So what we can even do to really confirm this is just have a row of these gradient tiles. So what I think I want to do for the next stream, I've been thinking about this a little bit, and as much as I would love to build a level editor in the asset tool, given where we're at, well, so we're actually, it's interesting, so maybe we're overflowing the byte that's seeking into the level, but you know, we'll figure that out. That's relatively simple compared to what we got working here with the data being loaded and scrolling. So what I was saying was, as much as I'd love to build a level editor within the asset tool, I think I'm more interested in dealing with the work involved in just getting that prepped up and into the game, so that we're not spending a lot of time building that in the asset tool. We can always go back to that, and probably we would use something like tiled, which if you've never used, so it is loading pretty far down here. Sorry, I'm talking and like debugging this at the same time. So if you've never used it, it is a pretty powerful tile editor. It would be more than sufficient for what we're trying to do, and it should be able to handle the meta tiles. And then the asset tool would essentially be responsible for kind of bringing all of that together, making sure that we've got all of those assets in the folder, so that when it does the export, it actually has everything, so that when you go to load the level, it works properly. We're obviously not dealing with things like the attribute table, where we are setting different palettes for things in the level. We're going to need to deal with that. Okay, so that appears to be where we're loading up until. So I'll have to figure out why that is. But anyway, so we'll have to deal with that, because that's going to be something that is going to be tricky, just because of the way that it works, where the name table data has the attributes for all of these meta tiles at the end of the name table data. So we're going to have to kind of seek into it to update, like if we want these gradients to be different gradient colors, because that's what the level requires, we're going to have to seek into that memory and update those attributes as we load those name tables in. So not only do we have to deal with loading tiles into the name table, but we also have to look at the palette for the meta tiles, and so that means we have to store those palettes somewhere, which means that, you know, we've got some work to be done beyond just building the levels. But you know, we've made some good progress. Obviously, again, this isn't perfect because it's still not seeking through the entire level, but we can get there, right? Like, we've tackled the harder part of understanding how to switch to the new mapper and get the scrolling part working properly, and getting these level tiles loaded as we scroll through the screen. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. Do we have any questions from anybody who's watching right now live before I wrap this up? Just realized I never took down the title for the recording, but oh well. I don't see any questions, but as usual, if you have any questions that you couldn't get to on the stream, you can find me on Twitter at Clairvis, and you can comment on the video on YouTube. I always post the recordings, and I'm also on Nintendo Age in the Discord frequently, so you can stop by there and ask me or any of the other people who are extremely knowledgeable, very friendly, and get your questions answered. So, if we're all good, have a great night, have a great weekend, and see you Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern.